My name is Tamsin Halverson, and I'm 30 years old. 14 years ago, my uncle drove me to a bus station in Portland, handed me $300 in cash, told me never to come back, and reported me missing to the Bend Police Department the next morning. He was 16 years older than me, twice my size, and the legal guardian of a 16-year-old orphan whose parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. He was also the trustee of my inheritance, $1.4 million from the wrongful death settlement, plus a family home worth nearly $500,000. By the time I was old enough to ask questions, that money had been redirected into his real estate development company, the family home had been sold, and I had become an inconvenient witness who needed to disappear. I disappeared. For 14 years, my uncle told the community in Bend, Oregon, that his troubled niece had run away and could not be found. He performed grief at family gatherings. He gave interviews to the local paper about the heartbreak of losing a child to mental health issues. He used my absence to consolidate his control of every dollar that should have been mine. But 2 months ago, I walked into a charity gala in Bend where my uncle was being honored as Developer of the Year. I walked in as a credentialed journalist with a folder of bank records and a compass my father gave me when I was 13. I sat in the press section. I waited for the Q&A portion of his acceptance speech, and then I stood up and asked him a question that destroyed 14 years of his lies in front of 200 witnesses. If you've ever been erased by your own family, written out of the story so completely that the people who erased you forgot you might come back, this one is for you. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, have you ever been told you didn't matter and proved them wrong? I want to hear the moment. Let me take you back. Before the gala, before the bus station, back to a house in Bend, Oregon, where I was a happy kid with a silver compass and a future that nobody had decided to steal yet. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, a high desert town in the central part of the state, surrounded by ponderosa pines and lava fields, and the Cascade Mountains rising blue-gray in the western distance. The kind of place where the air smells like pine sap and wood smoke for 9 months of the year, and where you can see the stars at night because the city is too small to drown them out. Our house was on a cul-de-sac called Juniper's Way, in a neighborhood on the west side of town near the Deschutes River. It was a single-story craftsman with a stone chimney and a wide front porch, and a backyard that backed up to a strip of public forest where I caught crawdads in the creek when I was little. My father, Eric Halverson, built half the house himself, extended the back deck, finished the basement, replaced the kitchen cabinets in his own time over the course of 3 years. He was a structural engineer for a firm in Bend that designed bridges and commercial buildings. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who carried a small notebook in his back pocket and wrote down measurements at the dinner table whenever an idea hit him. My mother, Iris, was a librarian at the Bend Public Library on Wall Street. She had silver blonde hair she wore in a long braid down her back and reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the specific kind of patience that you only develop from 20 years of helping kids find books they didn't know they wanted. She read to me every night until I was 10 years old. Even after I could read on my own, she'd sit on the edge of my bed and read a chapter from whatever book I was working through. She did the voices. She paused at the right moments. She made every story feel like a secret she was sharing only with me. I was an only child. My parents had wanted more children. They tried for years after me, but it didn't happen, and by the time I was 8 or 9, they had stopped trying and had built a small, complete family of 3. We had Sunday morning breakfasts at a diner called Jake's Diner on Greenwood Avenue. We hiked the Deschutes River Trail almost every weekend in good weather. We had a tradition of watching old black and white movies on Friday nights. My mother loved Hitchcock. My father loved westerns. I loved whatever they put on because I just loved being on the couch between them. It was a good childhood, a specific, unrepeatable good. I want to be clear about that, because what came after was so different that sometimes I worry the good parts will get crowded out by the rest of the story. They shouldn't. They were real. For 13 years, I had 2 parents who loved me without conditions and without performance, in a small house on Juniper's Way, in a town that smelled like pine. My father gave me the compass on my 13th birthday, April 4th. I came downstairs that morning and there was a small wrapped package next to my plate at the breakfast table. Not the big gift, which was a new bike I'd asked for, but a smaller one wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "Open this one first," my father said. Inside the brown paper was a wooden box about the size of my palm, hinged, with a small brass clasp. Inside the box, resting on a square of dark blue velvet, was a silver compass. Old, heavy for its size. The casing was etched with a small design, a sailing ship, sails full, cutting across waves. The face of the compass had a cream-colored dial with the cardinal directions marked in elegant black serif letters. "It belonged to your great-great-grandfather," my father said. "He was a merchant sailor on the Great Lakes. He gave it to his son, who gave it to his son, who gave it to my father, who gave it to me. Now it's yours." I held it carefully in both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. "Why are you giving it to me now?" He smiled. "Because 13 is when the women in our family start needing to know which direction they're going. Your great-great-grandmother got hers at 13. Your grandmother got hers. Your Aunt Margaret got hers. And now you." I looked up at him. "I thought it was passed to sons." "It was, until your grandmother had only daughters. She broke the tradition by giving it to your Aunt Margaret. Aunt Margaret gave it back to my father when she got older. She said it should stay with the family, and she trusted me to know who to give it to next." He tapped the box with his finger. "I've been holding on to it for 20 years, waiting to give it to a daughter of my own. Today's the day." I opened and closed the brass clasp 3 times. The needle wobbled and settled, pointing north. "Tamsin," my father said, "I want you to remember something about this compass. It belonged to a family that always knew how to find their way home. Whatever happens in your life, wherever you end up, north is north. The needle doesn't lie. You can always orient yourself if you know where north is." I told him I would remember. I meant it. I had no idea, sitting at that breakfast table, that I would need those exact words 2 years later, alone, on a bus station bench in Portland, with the compass hidden in the lining of my jacket, and no idea where home was anymore. My parents died on a Saturday in July, 4 months before my 15th birthday. They were driving back from a wedding in Klamath Falls, a college friend of my mother's whose daughter was getting married. I had stayed home with a cold. They left at 9 a.m. for the 4-hour drive south. I remember my mother kissing me on the forehead at the front door and saying, "Drink the soup in the fridge, we'll be back by midnight." They never came back. The accident happened on Highway 97, about 30 miles south of Bend, near the town of Lapine. A drunk driver in a pickup truck crossed the center line going 70 miles an hour and hit my parents' Subaru head-on. The drunk driver survived. My parents did not. The Oregon State Police told me later that both of them died at the scene. Instantly. They didn't suffer. I don't remember much about the next 2 days. I remember sitting on the porch on Juniper's Way that night with the front door open and the soup my mother had told me to eat going cold in the kitchen. I remember a state trooper in a brown uniform standing on my porch at 2 a.m. and the way his face was shaped. Careful, professional, the face of a man who had given the worst news of someone's life many times before. I remember him asking if there was an adult I could call. I called my Uncle Ronan. He was my father's older brother. He lived in Bend too, a bigger house, a richer life, a man I'd known my whole childhood without really knowing him. He arrived at my house at 2:47 a.m. He stood in the entryway in jeans and a flannel shirt and he looked at me, 14 years old, still in my pajamas, still holding the cordless phone, and he said, "Pack a bag, Tamsin. You're coming home with me." I packed a bag. I packed the compass. I didn't pack much else. I thought I'd be back at the house on Juniper's Way within a few days, that this was a temporary arrangement, that the world would somehow correct itself and put me back where I belonged. I never lived in that house again. Within 6 weeks, Uncle Ronan had it on the market. Within 3 months, it was sold to a couple from Portland who wanted a vacation home. The proceeds went into a trust account that was supposed to be mine and was, instead, the beginning of 14 years of theft. Uncle Ronan and Aunt Charisse lived in a 5-bedroom house on the western edge of Bend, in a gated development called Aubrey Glen, with a golf course view and a 3-car garage. The house was twice the size of ours on Juniper's Way and had none of its warmth. Vaulted ceilings, travertine floors, furniture that looked like it had been chosen by a designer rather than lived with. A formal dining room they used twice a year, a wine cellar in the basement, the kind of house that announces itself to visitors before anyone speaks. Ronan was 56 years old at the time of the accident, 16 years older than my father. He'd built a real estate development company called Halverson Holdings that owned commercial properties across Central Oregon, strip malls, office complexes, a few apartment buildings in Redmond and Sisters. He drove a black Lexus. He wore a Rolex that he made sure people noticed. He had the practiced confidence of a man who had been the most successful person in any room he'd entered for 30 years. My father had not been close with Ronan. I know that now. As a kid, I assumed they were normal brothers. They saw each other at holidays, they made small talk, they traded news about extended family. But there had been a distance between them I hadn't recognized as a child. My father was quiet and methodical, and built things with his hands. Ronan was loud and ambitious, and built things with other people's labor and other people's money. They had grown up in the same house in Eugene and had become fundamentally different men, and the difference had cooled into a polite, surface-level relationship that was less about love and more about the obligation of shared blood. Charisse, Ronan's wife, was 52, her second marriage. She'd been a real estate agent when she met Ronan and had stopped working after they married. She wore expensive clothes and kept the house immaculate and laughed at everything Ronan said. She had no children of her own and had never expressed much interest in children. When I came over for holidays as a kid, she'd hand me a juice box and disappear into the kitchen to talk to other adults. She wasn't cruel, she just wasn't present. The first 6 weeks at the Halverson house were strange. Not bad, exactly. Ronan and Charisse were performing the role of the grieving uncle and aunt who had taken in their orphan niece, and the performance required a certain amount of kindness. Charisse made me grilled cheese sandwiches. Ronan asked me about school. They put me in a guest bedroom on the 2nd floor with its own bathroom and a view of the golf course. They told me to take all the time I needed to adjust. What I needed was to grieve. What I got was logistics. Ronan had been named in my parents' will as guardian and trustee. My father had updated the will when I was 9. Ronan was the only adult relative on my father's side living nearby, and there was no extended family on my mother's side at all. My mother had been an only child of only children, and her parents had died before I was born. The will gave Ronan full legal authority over me until I turned 18, and full trustee authority over my inheritance until I turned 25. The inheritance was significant. Beyond the sale of the house on Juniper's Way, my parents had carried life insurance policies, modest ones, but my father's policy was supplemented by a wrongful death settlement from the drunk driver's insurance company. The settlement was finalized about 6 months after the accident. $1.4 million, paid out over time into a trust account managed by Ronan on my behalf. I didn't understand the numbers as a 14-year-old. I just knew that there was money, and that Ronan was in charge of it, and that he kept saying things like, "We have to be careful with your inheritance, Tamsin," and "The market is tricky right now, Tamsin," and "Trust me, I know what I'm doing." I trusted him, for a while, because what else does a 14-year-old do? The kindness lasted about 2 months. Then it began to recalibrate. The first sign was small. The food got worse. Charisse stopped making the grilled cheese sandwiches and started leaving pre-packaged meals in the freezer for me to microwave myself. The guest bedroom became Tamsin's room, but the door was no longer treated as private. Charisse would walk in without knocking, sometimes to put away laundry, sometimes for no reason I could identify. My computer, which my parents had bought me for school, was confiscated within the first month for safekeeping. When I asked for it back, Ronan said I could use the desktop in his home office when an adult was present. Then the access to my parents' belongings began to disappear. After the house on Juniper's Way was sold, Ronan arranged for the contents to be moved into a storage unit. He told me I could go through everything when I was older, when I was ready. I asked him at 15 and again at 16, and both times he told me the timing wasn't right. He never let me into the storage unit. I never saw most of my parents' belongings again. My mother's books, my father's woodworking tools, the photo albums, the kitchen plates with the blue rim that had been my grandmother's. All of it disappeared into a unit I was never allowed to enter. The compass survived only because I had hidden it in the lining of my jacket within the first week of moving in. I'd done it instinctively, the way an animal hides something it values from a predator it doesn't yet understand is a predator. I'd cut a small slit in the inner lining of my winter coat with a pair of nail scissors and slipped the compass inside, between the fabric and the insulation. The brass clasp pressed against my ribs whenever I wore the coat. I checked on it every few weeks to make sure it was still there. By the time I was 16, I had figured out what was happening. Not all of it. I didn't understand the scale of the financial fraud yet, but enough. Ronan was treating my inheritance like a personal credit line. He talked about consolidating the trust into the company's investment portfolio. He referenced tax-advantaged restructuring and leverage opportunities, and other phrases that sounded sophisticated and meant nothing to a teenager who had never balanced a checkbook. When I asked questions, he became impatient. When I pressed, he became cold. When I told him I wanted to see the trust account statements, he told me they were too complex for me to understand and that I needed to trust the process. I stopped trusting the process around my 16th birthday. I started keeping a notebook hidden in the lining of the same jacket where I kept the compass. In the notebook, I wrote down everything I overheard: phone calls, dinner conversations between Ronan and Charisse, references to specific properties or accounts or lawyers. I didn't know what most of it meant, but I knew, with the instinct of a kid who had grown up in a house where information was respected, that recording things was the only power I had. The isolation accelerated after I started asking questions. Ronan stopped letting me see extended family. There weren't many: a great aunt in Eugene named Leona, who had been my grandfather's sister, and a few distant cousins on my mother's side I'd met once or twice. But Ronan made sure I had no contact with any of them. When Aunt Leona called the house wanting to visit me, Ronan told her I was going through a difficult adjustment and that visits would be disruptive. When my old friends from junior high in West Bend called to invite me to things, Charisse took messages and didn't pass them on. When I tried to call them myself from the home office phone, I discovered Ronan had blocked outgoing long-distance calls. He pulled me out of my old school. He enrolled me in a small private high school on the south side of Bend called Cascade Christian Academy, a school where I knew no one, and where the social structure was so tightly established that a transfer student in 10th grade had no realistic chance of integrating. I spent 2 years eating lunch alone in the library. I made one friend, a quiet girl named Beatrix Henning, who worked in the school office. But Ronan discouraged me from spending time with her outside school. He said the Hennings were not our kind of people. He never explained what he meant. I think it just meant they weren't useful to him. By the spring of my 16th year, I was a ghost in that house. I went to school, I came home, I ate dinner alone in the breakfast nook because Ronan and Charisse often had dinner guests in the formal dining room I wasn't invited to. I did my homework in my room, I slept, I woke up, I did it again. I had no friends, no extended family contact, no privacy, no access to my own inheritance, and a growing notebook full of overheard fragments that I didn't know what to do with. What I did have was the compass, hidden in my jacket, pointing north no matter where I was or what was happening around me. I used to take it out at night when Ronan and Charisse were asleep, sit on the floor of my closet with the door closed, and watch the needle wobble and settle. North is north. The needle doesn't lie. You can always orient yourself if you know where north is. I didn't know it yet, but the night Ronan would drive me to the bus station was 11 months away. And when it came, the compass was the only thing I'd be allowed to take with me. The night Ronan drove me to the bus station was a Wednesday in March. I was 16 years and 11 months old. The reason was a folder. I had found a folder in Ronan's home office that afternoon. He had left for a meeting in Redmond and Charisse was at her weekly hair appointment, and the office door was open for once because the cleaning service had been there in the morning. I had walked in to look for a stapler and noticed a manila folder on the corner of his desk, labeled Halverson Trust, Q1 Allocations. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a strategy. I had 2 years of suspicion and a notebook full of fragments and an open door. I picked up the folder. I took it to my room. I read it. Inside were quarterly financial statements for the trust account my parents had left for me. I didn't understand most of the line items, but I understood the numbers at the top of each page, the total balance of the trust at the start of each quarter, and the total at the end. The trust had started, after the wrongful death settlement was finalized, at $1.4 million. The most recent statement, from December of the previous year, showed a balance of $321,000. Over 2 years, more than $1 million had left the account. The allocation notes referenced specific transfers, payments to entities with names like Cascade Investment Partners, LLC, and Halverson Holdings Capital Group. I didn't know what these were, but I recognized one phrase from a conversation I'd overheard 6 months earlier. Ronan had told a business associate on the phone that he was moving the niece's money into the new development fund. I had written that exact phrase in my notebook. I sat on my bedroom floor with the folder in my lap, and I felt the specific cold that comes with confirmation. My uncle had stolen over $1 million from me, was still stealing. The performance of guardianship, the bedroom with the golf course view, the pre-packaged meals, the lectures about trust the process, was the cover for a sustained, methodical, 2-year theft. I made a copy of the folder, or I tried to. The desktop computer in Ronan's office had a scanner attached, and I had figured out how to use it during the rare times I'd been allowed in there. I took the folder back to the office, scanned every page to a USB drive I'd bought at school for a class project, and put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. I went back to my room. I put the USB drive in the lining of my jacket beside the compass. I waited. What I should have done was call Aunt Leona in Eugene. What I should have done was call the police. What I should have done was call a lawyer or a teacher or any adult outside the Halverson household. But I was 16. I was scared. I had spent 2 years being told I couldn't trust my own perceptions, and the part of me that knew I should act was outvoted by the part of me that just wanted to survive the day. Ronan came home at 6 p.m. Charisse came home at 6:45. Dinner was takeout from a Thai place on Galveston Avenue. I ate in the breakfast nook alone, the way I always did. I went to my room at 8 p.m. I tried to read. At 9:14 p.m., Ronan knocked on my bedroom door. "Tamsin, I need you to come downstairs." I knew, the way you know certain things in your body before your mind catches up, that he had figured out the folder. I don't know how. Maybe the cleaning service had moved it slightly. Maybe he had a system for tracking which papers were where. Maybe he had cameras in his office that I didn't know about. It didn't matter. He knew. I went downstairs. He was standing in the kitchen with his coat on. Charisse was nowhere to be seen. "We need to take a drive." "Where?" "Just get in the car, Tamsin." I got in the car, the black Lexus. He drove west out of Bend, then north on Highway 97, the same highway my parents had died on the other direction. He didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. I didn't either. I knew that whatever was about to happen had already been decided in his head, and the only thing left was the execution. About an hour into the drive, somewhere past Madras, he finally spoke. "You went into my office today." "I was looking for a stapler." "You looked at a folder you weren't supposed to look at." I didn't answer. "Tamsin, I'm going to be honest with you. You and I have a problem. You're 16 years old, you're getting curious about things that are too complicated for you to understand, and that curiosity is going to cause damage to a lot of people if it isn't redirected. So we're going to redirect it. Tonight." "Where are you taking me?" "Portland. There's a bus station downtown. I'm going to drop you off there with some money. You're going to use that money to start a new life somewhere. Somewhere you can be your own person without the burden of all this family history." "You're abandoning me." "I'm liberating you. There's a difference." I stared at the dashboard. We were on a stretch of Highway 97 north of Madras, where the sky was completely black and the road was lit only by his headlights. There were no other cars. There was nowhere to run. What are you going to tell people? I'm going to tell people the truth, in a manner of speaking. That you've been struggling with mental health issues since your parents died. That you ran away. That I tried to find you. That I'm devastated. None of that is true. It will be after tonight, Tamsin. That's how truth works. You declare it, and then you live inside it until the world catches up. He drove the rest of the way to Portland in silence. We arrived at the Greyhound station on Northwest 6th Avenue at 1:23 a.m. He pulled up to the curb. He took out his wallet, counted $300 in 20s, and handed them to me. Don't come back to Bend. Don't contact me or Charisse or anyone in the family. If you do, I'll have you committed to a psychiatric facility. I'm your legal guardian until you're 18, and I have the documentation to do it. Do you understand me? I understood him. I took the $300. I got out of the car. I closed the door. I stood on the sidewalk in front of the Portland Greyhound station at 1:24 a.m. on a Wednesday in March, 16 years old, with $300 and a duffel bag and a compass and a USB drive in the lining of my jacket. He drove away. I watched the black Lexus turn the corner and disappear, and I understood that whatever happened next, I was the only person I had. I sat down on a bench inside the station. I took the compass out of my jacket lining. I held it in my palm. The needle wobbled. It settled. North was north. I was facing east, toward the inside of the station. North was to my left, toward the parking lot. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew which direction north was. And right then, that was enough. The next 14 years are a story I could tell in many different ways. I'll tell it briefly because the point of this video isn't the survival, it's what came after. But you should know how I got from a bench in the Portland Greyhound station to the press section of the Bend Chamber of Commerce Gala 14 years later. Because the road wasn't short. The first 6 months were the hardest. I slept in a shelter on Burnside Street for the first 3 weeks, a women's shelter that took minors in crisis and that asked few questions if you said your situation at home was unsafe. I told them my name was Tamsin and that I had nowhere to go. They gave me a bed and 3 meals a day and the contact information for a social worker named Marisol Ruiz, who became the first adult since my parents who treated me like a person instead of a problem. Marisol helped me get into a transitional youth program for unaccompanied minors. She helped me enroll in a GED program at Portland Community College. She helped me apply for emancipation from my legal guardian, a process that took 8 months and required me to demonstrate financial self-sufficiency, which I did by working 2 part-time jobs at a coffee shop and a grocery store. By the time I was 17 and a half, I was a legally emancipated minor with my own apartment, a studio in Northeast Portland that cost $400 a month, my GED, and a credit score I was building from absolute zero. I never used the USB drive during those years. I kept it. I knew what was on it. But pursuing the case against Ronan would have required hiring a lawyer and proving the fraud, and I had neither the money nor the emotional capacity for a legal battle while I was just trying to survive. The USB drive went into a small fireproof box I bought at a hardware store on Sandy Boulevard, along with the compass when I wasn't carrying it. The box went into the back of my closet. I didn't open it for years. I got my associate's degree from PCC at 20. I transferred to Portland State University and got a bachelor's in journalism at 23. I started working for a small alternative news weekly called the Portland Mercury, doing community reporting and learning the trade. At 25, I moved to an independent investigative newsroom called Pacific Northwest Investigations, where I started covering missing persons cases, a beat I had chosen specifically because I had been a missing person myself, even if no one had really been looking for me. I was good at the work, not because I was naturally talented, because I knew what it felt like to be the person on the other side of the story. I knew how to read a family member's lies. I knew how to spot the inconsistencies in a guardian's story. I knew when an official narrative was protecting someone instead of explaining anything. And one Thursday afternoon, at 29 years old, while researching a database of missing persons cases in Central Oregon for an unrelated story. I typed my own name into the search field, just to see. There I was, Tamsin Halverson, reported missing from Bend, Oregon, March 18th of my 16th year. Status, unresolved. Reporting party, Ronan Halverson, legal guardian. Contact for tips, Bend Police Department, non-emergency line. I had been a missing person for 14 years. The case was still technically open, and the man who had reported me missing was the same man who had driven me to the Portland bus station and told me never to come back. I sat at my desk in the newsroom and I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, not exactly. Something more like recognition. The thing I had been carrying for 14 years had a name and a case number and a public record now. And I was a journalist with the skills to do something about it. I went home that night. I opened the fireproof box in the back of my closet for the first time in years. I took out the compass and the USB drive. The compass was tarnished but intact. The USB drive was a piece of technology so old I wasn't sure it would still work. It worked. Every file was still there. The USB drive contained 63 pages of documents I had scanned in Ronan's home office 14 years earlier. Quarterly trust statements, allocation notes, transfer records, the names of entities I had not understood as a 16-year-old, but that I now knew how to research as a 30-year-old investigative journalist. I needed help. Specifically, I needed someone who could read financial records the way I read missing persons cases. Someone who could see the architecture of fraud beneath the surface of legitimate-looking paperwork. I knew exactly who to ask. Devin Mukherjee was a forensic accountant who consulted for Pacific Northwest Investigations on financial stories. He was 41, slim, with wire-rimmed glasses and the precise diction of a man who had spent his career making numbers tell the truth their owners didn't want told. He'd worked with our newsroom on 3 major investigations in the past 2 years: a real estate fraud case in Spokane, a charity embezzlement story in Eugene, a state contractor kickback investigation in Salem. He was the best at what he did. I asked to meet him for coffee on a Friday morning at a place on Northeast Alberta Street called Random Order Pie Bar. Neutral ground, not the newsroom, somewhere I could explain the personal context without an audience. Devin arrived at 9 a.m. exactly. He was always exactly on time. He ordered black coffee and a slice of Marionberry pie and sat across from me with the calm attention of a man who had been told this conversation was personal and was prepared to listen accordingly. I told him everything. The accident, Ronan, the trust, the folder, the bus station, 14 years of silence, the USB drive, the missing persons database. I laid it out factually, in chronological order, the way I would lay out a case for a story. Devin listened without interrupting. He took 2 notes on a small pad he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Tamsin, I want to tell you something before we discuss the documents. My family came to the U.S. from Calcutta when I was 9 years old. My father had a brother here, my uncle, who had been in Portland for 15 years already and had a successful import-export business. He sponsored our immigration. He helped my parents get on their feet. He was, by all appearances, a generous family member, doing what family members are supposed to do." He took a sip of his coffee. "Over the next decade, my uncle systematically defrauded my parents out of their savings. Small loans they'd given him for his business that were never repaid. Co-signed credit lines he maxed out. A business partnership he convinced my father to enter that turned out to be structured so that my parents bore all the risk and he kept all the profits. By the time my father figured out what was happening, my parents had lost almost everything they'd built since arriving in America. They never recovered, financially or emotionally. My father died at 61 of what I am convinced was a stress-related heart attack. I was 26 when I started studying forensic accounting. I chose this work because of him." He set the coffee down. I'm telling you this because I want you to know I will take this case as seriously as I would take my own father's. Show me what's on the drive. I showed him. We sat in the back corner of Random Order for 3 hours, Devin reading the documents on my laptop, asking me questions about the dates and the entity names, taking notes in his small pad. By the time we finished, he had filled 4 pages with handwriting too small for me to read upside down. Tamsin, he said finally, what you have here is a strong starting point. The documents you scanned at 16 show a clear pattern of unauthorized transfers from your trust account to entities your uncle controlled. But these documents are 14 years old. To make a current case, for a journalism story or for a legal proceeding, we need to trace what happened after you left. Did the fraud continue? Did he liquidate the rest of the trust? Where did the money go? I can help you find out, but it's going to take time, and it's going to require pulling a lot of public records. How long? 6 to 8 weeks of focused work, maybe longer. I'll do it on my own time. I'm not billing the newsroom for this. This one's personal. We started the following Monday. Devin worked from his home office in Selwood. I worked from my apartment in Northeast Portland. We met every Wednesday evening at a bar called The Standard on Hawthorne Boulevard to compare notes. Neutral location, midweek, the kind of place where 2 people could spread papers across a table and not be disturbed. The investigation took 7 weeks. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Devin traced the entities listed in the original documents. Cascade Investment Partners, LLC, Halverson Holdings Capital Group. 3 additional shell companies that had been created in the years after I left, each one nested inside the next like a financial Russian doll. The trust money had moved through these entities and ended up funding 3 real estate developments in Central Oregon, a strip mall in Redmond, an office complex in Sisters, and a luxury subdivision project in Bend that had broken ground when I was 19. By the time I was 25, the age at which the trust was supposed to terminate and any remaining funds were supposed to be released to me, the trust account had been drained completely. The final balance, according to records Devin obtained from the financial institution that had held the trust, was $87.43. Ronan had liquidated the rest in the months leading up to my 25th birthday, knowing that there would be no inquiry because I had been declared missing 9 years earlier and was presumed by the family and the community to be either dead or unreachable. He had stolen everything. The wrongful death settlement, the proceeds from the sale of the house on Juniper's Way, the life insurance payouts, the interest that had accrued on the trust account over a decade, all of it. Approximately $1.9 million in total, if you counted the appreciation and the interest. He had used it to build his real estate empire while telling the community in Bend that his troubled niece had vanished and broken his heart. Devin also found something I hadn't expected. In 2018, when I was 24, Ronan had filed a petition with the court to have me declared legally dead. The petition was based on the fact that I had been missing for 8 years with no contact. The court had not granted the petition. The legal threshold for declaring a missing person dead in Oregon is typically 5 to 7 years of complete absence with active investigation, and Ronan's petition was deemed premature because he could not document any active search efforts. But the petition itself was a public record. He had tried to make my disappearance permanent, not just socially, but legally. He had wanted me erased from the world on paper, the way wrong story. He had wanted me erased, the way you erase a debt. I read the petition document at Devin's kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon in late September. Ronan's signature was on the last page. Above his signature, he had checked a box affirming that he had made every reasonable effort to locate the missing person, and that he believed the missing person to be deceased based on the duration and circumstances of the absence. He had not made any effort to locate me. He had been the one who put me on the bus, and he had signed a court document under penalty of perjury saying he believed I was dead. This is going to be the centerpiece of your story, isn't it? Devin said quietly, watching me read. This is going to be the centerpiece of his life ending the way he built it, I said. The Bend Chamber of Commerce Annual Awards Gala was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday in October. Devin had found the announcement in a press release on the Chamber's website during week 5 of our investigation. Ronan Halverson was being honored as Developer of the Year, a recognition of his decades of contribution to Central Oregon's commercial growth and his commitment to community development. The gala would be held at the River House on the Deschutes, a hotel and conference center on the Deschutes River with a large ballroom that seated up to 300 people. The event was open to the press. Credentialed journalists could attend at no cost and would have a designated section near the front of the ballroom. I had press credentials. I had been a credentialed journalist for 7 years. I called the Chamber's media coordinator on a Monday morning and registered to attend. I gave my full name, Tamsin Halverson, and my publication, Pacific Northwest Investigations. The coordinator, a cheerful woman named Ray Whitman, did not flag my name. There was no reason she would. The Halverson name was common enough in Central Oregon, and the missing person case from 14 years ago was not actively in anyone's mind. She added me to the press list and emailed me a confirmation. "We'll have a Q&A portion after the keynote and the awards," she wrote. "Press will be invited to ask questions of the honorees." I read that line 3 times. Then I forwarded the email to Devin with a single sentence in the body. "We're in." Devin emailed back 12 minutes later. "Time to bring him home." The River House on the Deschutes sat on a curve of the river just north of downtown Bend, surrounded by ponderosa pines and landscaped paths that led down to the water. The hotel had hosted the Chamber of Commerce Gala for 15 years. The ballroom was on the 2nd floor, high ceilings, exposed wood beams, tall windows that looked out toward the Cascade Mountains and the Three Sisters Peaks rising blue-white in the distance. I drove from Portland that morning with Devin in the passenger seat. 3 hours through the high desert on Highway 26, the same kind of road my parents had driven the day they died. Devin had insisted on coming, not as a participant, but as backup. He sat in the press section beside me as a guest. He carried a leather portfolio containing copies of every document we had assembled over 7 weeks. Trust statements, transfer records, the petition to declare me dead, bank records from the shell entities, real estate filings tied to the developments built with my inheritance. I had 3 things in my own bag. The first was my press credentials and a small notebook I would use during the event, the way any journalist uses a notebook, to take notes, ask questions, document the proceedings. The second was a single folder containing the most damning of the documents Devin and I had assembled, organized for fast reference. The third was the silver compass. I had taken it out of the fireproof box that morning before leaving Portland. I held it in my palm in the kitchen of my apartment and let the needle wobble and settle, and I said, out loud, to nobody, "North is north. The needle doesn't lie." Then I put it in the inside pocket of my blazer, where I could feel its weight against my chest. I needed to feel it during what was about to happen. We arrived at the River House at 5:30 p.m. The reception was scheduled for 6, dinner at 7, awards and speeches at 8:15. Devin and I checked in at the press table in the hotel lobby, where Ray Whitman, the media coordinator, handed us name badges and a printed program. The program was a glossy 8-page booklet. Page 4 listed the honorees. Page 5 listed the keynote speaker, the mayor of Bend, a woman named Cassandra Ellsworth, who had been a city councilwoman when I was in elementary school. Page 6 was a full-page biography and photograph of Ronan Halverson, Developer of the Year. The photograph was recent. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was fully silver now, the same Rolex, the same confident posture. The biography described him as a pillar of Central Oregon's business community for over 3 decades, founder and president of Halverson Holdings, a tireless advocate for responsible commercial development, and a generous supporter of local charities including the Bend Children's Foundation and the Deschutes River Preservation Trust. Tireless advocate, generous supporter. The biography did not mention his orphaned niece. Of course it didn't. Devin read the biography over my shoulder and made a small sound, not a word, just an exhalation through his nose, the sound of a man absorbing something offensive. "He's been giving money to children's charities," he said quietly. children's charities. With my money. With your money. We walked into the ballroom. The room was already filling with guests, business leaders, politicians, civic figures, members of the chamber. Maybe 150 people in cocktail attire, holding wine glasses, networking. The press section was at the right side of the ballroom, near the front, 4 rows of chairs separated from the main seating area by a small velvet rope. There were 6 other reporters there. I recognized none of them. They were local: Bend Bulletin, Central Oregon Daily News, 2 local radio reporters, and a freelance photographer. Devin and I took seats in the second row of the press section. From this position, I could see the entire ballroom, the round dinner tables with white tablecloths, the small stage at the front with a podium and a microphone, the long table of honorees set up perpendicular to the main stage, where Ronan would sit with the other award recipients during dinner. I scanned the room for Ronan. He was near the bar. I saw him before he saw me. And even after 14 years, even from across a crowded ballroom, even with his hair turned silver and his face slightly heavier, I knew him instantly. The posture had not changed, the way he held his drink, the way he angled his shoulders toward the most important person in any conversation. The way he laughed, too loudly, too readily, the laugh of a man who had been performing competence for so long that the performance had become the man. He was wearing a charcoal suit and a deep red tie. He was talking to 3 other men I didn't recognize, fellow business leaders probably, or city officials. He looked entirely at ease. He had no idea that the niece he had declared dead in court 4 years ago was sitting 80 feet away, watching him. Charisse was beside him. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair was shorter and dyed a careful auburn. She wore a navy dress and pearls. She held a glass of white wine and laughed at things Ronan said with the same automatic cheerfulness she had always used. Some people don't change. They just age into more refined versions of who they were at 20. I did not let myself stare. I took out my notebook and pretended to make notes about the room, the way a working reporter would. Devin flipped through the program beside me. We were 2 professional journalists at a chamber event. We were invisible. Dinner was served at 7:05. I ate almost nothing. Devin ate everything on his plate because Devin had the kind of metabolism that demanded fuel even in tense circumstances. I appreciated his calm. It anchored me. The keynote address began at 8:15. Mayor Ellsworth spoke for 15 minutes about Bend's economic growth, the importance of responsible development, and the role of business leaders in shaping the community's future. Her speech was polished and forgettable. The audience applauded politely. She introduced the awards segment. 3 other awards were presented before Ronan's: Small Business of the Year, Nonprofit Leadership, Community Service Award. Each recipient gave a brief acceptance speech. Each speech was met with warm applause. The energy in the room was the easy, well-fed energy of a community celebrating itself. Then the mayor returned to the podium and said the words I had been waiting 9 years to hear in a context I could finally do something about. And now, our Developer of the Year. This award recognizes the individual whose vision and dedication have most significantly shaped the commercial landscape of Central Oregon over the past year. Our recipient has been a fixture in this community for over 30 years. He has built developments that house our businesses, employ our neighbors, and define our skyline. He has been a generous contributor to causes that benefit our most vulnerable residents, including, notably, the Bend Children's Foundation. Please join me in welcoming this year's Developer of the Year, Ronan Halverson. The applause was loud and sustained. Ronan stood up from the honoree table, buttoned his charcoal jacket, and walked to the stage with the practiced confidence of a man accepting recognition he believed he had earned. He shook the mayor's hand. He took the small glass trophy. He turned to the audience and gave a small, dignified wave. I felt my hand move to my chest, to the inside pocket of my blazer where the compass was. I felt its weight through the fabric. Ronan stepped to the microphone. He spoke for about 3 minutes, thanking the chamber, thanking his team at Halverson Holdings, thanking his wife Charisse for her unwavering support. He talked about his vision for Ben's future. He talked about responsible growth. He talked about giving back to the community that had given him everything. He spoke with the practiced ease of a man who had given dozens of speeches like this one and knew exactly which beats to hit. Then he closed with a line that almost made me lose my composure for the first time that evening. I dedicate this award tonight to the family I've lost along the way. Building a legacy in this community has come with personal cost, and I think often about the loved ones who are no longer with us to share these moments. They are the reason I keep building. The loved ones who are no longer with us. He was talking about my parents. He was talking, by implication, about me, the niece he had declared dead in court. He was using our memories as a closing line at his award ceremony. The applause swelled. Ronan smiled and bowed his head. The mayor returned to the podium. Thank you, Ronan. We'll now open the floor for questions from the press. Members of the press, if you have a question for any of tonight's honorees, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone. This was the moment. I raised my hand. A young man in a black polo shirt, chamber staff holding a wireless microphone, walked across the ballroom toward the press section. He handed me the microphone. I stood up. I looked at Ronan first. I waited until he saw me, until his eyes, narrowing slightly in the way people's eyes narrow when they are processing a face they cannot immediately place, locked onto mine. My name is Tamsin Halverson, I said. I'm with Pacific Northwest Investigations. My question is for Mr. Halverson. The room did not gasp. The room did not move. But I watched Ronan Halverson's face transform in real time over the course of 3 seconds. The narrowing of the eyes turned into widening. The polite smile turned into stillness. The color in his face, the warm flush of a man who had been drinking wine and accepting praise, drained away in a single visible wave. He gripped the edge of the podium with both hands. Charisse, sitting at the honoree table, dropped her wine glass. The glass hit the table and toppled. White wine spread across the linen tablecloth. She did not move to clean it up. She stared at me with the expression of a woman seeing a ghost. Except I was not a ghost, and we both knew it. Mr. Halverson, I continued. My voice was steady. The ballroom was silent in the specific way ballrooms become silent when something unscripted is happening on a microphone. In 2010, you became the legal guardian and trustee of a trust account belonging to your niece, who was orphaned by a car accident on Highway 97. The trust was established with proceeds from a wrongful death settlement, life insurance policies, and the sale of the family home. The total initial value of the trust was approximately $1.4 million. Can you confirm that for the record? Ronan did not speak. He was staring at me. His mouth was slightly open. In 2018, I continued, you filed a petition with the Chutes County Circuit Court to have your missing niece declared legally dead. The petition was denied for failure to demonstrate active search efforts. At the time you filed the petition, the trust account had been drained to a balance of approximately $3,000. By 2019, when your niece would have turned 25 and been legally entitled to receive any remaining trust funds, the balance was $87.43. A woman in the third row of dinner tables, I didn't know her name, but she was wearing a green dress and a name tag that identified her as a city council member, set down her fork and turned in her seat to stare at me. The woman beside her did the same. The energy in the room had shifted from polite attention to electric, focused stillness. Can you explain, for the record, what happened to $1.4 million between 2010 and 2019? And specifically, can you explain the transfers from the trust account to entities including Cascade Investment Partners, LLC, and Halverson Holdings Capital Group, both of which you control? The mayor stepped toward the microphone, looking confused. I'm sorry, what is the question? The question, Mayor Ellsworth, is whether the developer of the year stole approximately $1.9 million from his orphaned niece's trust fund and then attempted to have her declared legally dead to make the theft permanent. I am the niece. I have the documents. I would like Mr. Halverson to respond. I held up the folder Devin had prepared. 200 guests, the mayor, the chamber leadership, 6 members of the press, and the honoree of the evening were all looking at it. Ronan finally found his voice. It came out cracked, smaller than the voice he had used during his acceptance speech. This is not the appropriate forum for— It's the only forum I have, Mr. Halverson. You drove me to a bus station in Portland 14 years ago and told me never to come back. I came back. I'm a journalist now, and I have every transfer, every bank statement, every shell entity filing, and a copy of the petition you signed under penalty of perjury claiming you believed me to be dead. Would you like to address the documents? Or would you prefer that I read them aloud? The young man in the black polo shirt, the one who had handed me the microphone, was standing very still in the aisle, clearly unsure whether to retrieve the microphone or let me continue. The mayor was looking at Ronan. The chamber executive director, a man in a navy suit at the front table, was already standing up and moving toward the stage. Ronan turned away from the podium. He looked at Charisse, for help, for instruction, for some kind of lifeline. Charisse was not looking at him. Charisse was looking at her hands. The wine on the tablecloth had spread to the edge and was beginning to drip onto the floor. A man in the second row of dinner tables stood up. He was a tall man in his 60s with a gray beard, and I recognized him from the program. Howard Briggs, the chamber treasurer, and according to the biography on page 2, a longtime business associate of Ronan's. "Ronan," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Is this true?" Ronan did not answer. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 8 seconds. The kind of silence that becomes its own answer when it lasts too long. "I think," Howard Briggs said, "we need to take a recess. Mayor Ellsworth, I'd suggest we pause the program." The mayor nodded, her face pale. "We'll take a brief recess. The program will resume shortly. Please remain in your seats or feel free to use the restroom area." The hum of the room broke open. People started talking immediately, leaning toward each other, processing what had just happened. Some stood up. Some pulled out their phones. The freelance photographer in the press section beside me was already taking pictures of Ronan, of Charisse, of me, of the documents in my hand. Ronan walked off the stage. He did not return to the honoree table. He walked toward the side exit, the same kind of side exit Vernon Trask had walked through, the same kind of exit Camille had walked through, the same kind of exit every cornered villain in every story walks through, when the room they have controlled is no longer theirs to control. He moved fast. Charisse followed him a few seconds later, abandoning the wine-stained tablecloth and the half-finished dessert and the trophy he had left at the podium. I sat back down. Devin put his hand on my shoulder, briefly, and removed it. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Howard Briggs walked over to the press section. He stopped in front of me. He was an older man with the formality of a generation that still extended hands and made eye contact when introducing themselves. "Ms. Halverson, I've known your uncle for 22 years. I served on the chamber board with him for 11 of those years. I never met you. I never knew you existed in the way you just described. If what you said is true, and I have to operate as if it is until proven otherwise, then I owe you an apology on behalf of an organization that has been honoring a man we apparently did not know. You couldn't have known. That is what people say when they are trying to be kind. It is not always true." He paused. "I would like a copy of those documents, tonight, so that the chamber can begin its own internal review immediately." I gave him a copy. Devin had brought 3 sets, anticipating exactly this. Howard took them with both hands. The freelance photographer asked if she could photograph the documents. I told her yes. She did. The Bend Bulletin reporter asked if I would do an interview. I told her yes. Tomorrow morning, after I had spoken with the Deschutes County District Attorney's Office, which I planned to do at 9 a.m. the next day. The mayor came over last. She did not apologize. She just said, "I am very sorry for what happened to you, and I am very sorry I introduced him to this room tonight." The trophy was still on the podium where Ronan had left it, glass and acrylic, etched with his name and the year. Nobody collected it. It sat there for the rest of the evening, a small monument to a recognition that had been revoked by the very act of being given. The Deschutes County District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation into Ronan Halverson within 48 hours of the gala. The Oregon Department of Justice joined the investigation a week later, after the financial records Devin and I had assembled were formally submitted to both agencies. The case was complex. 14 years of fraud spread across multiple shell entities and real estate transactions. But the documents were clean, and the timeline was clear. Ronan was indicted 4 months later on charges of trust fund embezzlement, financial exploitation of a dependent minor, fraud, and perjury. The perjury charge was for the 2018 petition in which he had sworn under oath that he believed me to be deceased. His attorney attempted to negotiate a plea deal almost immediately. The DA's office, citing the duration of the fraud and the vulnerability of the victim, declined the first 3 offers. I am not following the criminal case closely. Devin is. He sends me updates when something significant happens. The trial is currently scheduled for next spring. Ronan is out on bail but has been removed from every board he served on, including the Ben Children's Foundation, which issued a public statement returning all of his prior donations. Halverson Holdings is in the process of being restructured under a court-appointed receiver. The luxury subdivision in Bend that was built with my inheritance, the one that broke ground when I was 19, is the subject of a separate civil suit I filed to recover proceeds. I will not get all of the money back. Devin was honest with me about that from the beginning. Some of it was spent. Some of it was leveraged into other investments that have lost value. Some of it is buried in entities that will take years to unwind. But a portion will return to me, enough to feel like restitution, even if the number is smaller than what was taken. The money was never the point. The point was the record. The point was that the man who declared me dead in court had to stand in a courtroom and explain what he did. The point was that the community in Bend that had pitied him for 14 years now knew the truth. Charisse filed for divorce 6 weeks after the gala. Her attorney issued a statement claiming she had been unaware of the financial fraud and was a victim of Ronan's deception herself. I don't believe her. Devin doesn't believe her. The DA's office is still investigating her potential involvement. Whether or not she faces charges, the marriage is over, and the life she built around Ronan's success has collapsed. She wrote me a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, sent to my newsroom address. I read it once. It was full of the language of women who have spent their lives benefiting from a man's choices and now want to be excused from those choices. I didn't know the full extent. I trusted him. I was a different person then. She did not apologize for the years of silence in the house in Aubrey Glen. She did not apologize for the prepackaged meals or the locked-down phone or the cleaning of my parents' belongings out of the storage unit she had access to. She apologized for what happened to you in the passive voice, as if my childhood had been a weather event rather than a series of choices made by adults. I did not respond. I put the letter in a folder labeled Things I Have Decided Not to Carry, and I closed the folder. 2 days after the gala, I drove to the cemetery in Bend where my parents are buried. I had not been there in 14 years. Ronan had taken me to the funeral when I was 14, and I had not been back since. The cemetery is on a hill on the east side of town, with a view of the Three Sisters Peaks in the distance. It was a clear October morning when I went. Cold, blue sky, the smell of pine and dry grass. I parked at the entrance and walked the path to the section where my parents were buried. I had to ask the groundskeeper for help finding the plot. He looked it up in a small book in his office and walked me to the spot personally. The headstones were side by side. Eric Halverson and Iris Halverson, their dates of birth and death. Below my father's name, the simple inscription my mother had probably chosen. Builder, father, quiet man. Below my mother's name, reader, mother, voice in the dark. That last phrase, voice in the dark, was a reference to her reading me bedtime stories. I knew it instantly. Someone in the family had chosen those inscriptions, probably Aunt Leona, who I had not been able to see for 14 years and who I planned to visit in Eugene the following weekend. I sat down on the grass between the two headstones. It was damp from the morning. I didn't care. I took the silver compass out of my jacket pocket. I held it in my palm. I opened the brass clasp. The needle wobbled and settled, pointing north, toward the back of the cemetery, toward the mountains, toward the same direction it had always pointed and would always point. "Dad?" I said, out loud, to the headstone. I came back. I told him everything: the bus station, the shelter, the GED, the journalism degree, the compass, the folder, the gala. I told him about Devon and about Mrs. Brennan. Wrong story. I told him about Devon and about the documents and about the question I asked into the microphone in front of 200 people. I told him about the trial that was coming. I told him I had used what he gave me, not just the compass, but the practice of paying attention, the practice of writing things down, the engineer's habit of checking the math twice before trusting the answer. I told him I still didn't know where home was. I told him I was still building toward it. I placed the compass on the top of his headstone for a moment. Just one moment. The silver caught the morning light and the needle still pointed north. Then I picked it up and put it back in my pocket. I needed it. I still needed to know which direction I was going. The compass was not for the dead. It was for the living. My father had given it to me at 13 for a reason. He had said the women in our family started needing to know which direction they were going at 13, and he had been right, except the journey had taken longer than either of us could have imagined. I stood up. I brushed the damp grass off my pants. I told my mother I loved her. I told my father thank you. I walked back down the path to my car. I drove back to Portland that afternoon, 3 hours through the high desert. I stopped at a viewpoint just south of Madras, where the road curves and you can see the Cascade Range stretching across the western horizon. Mount Hood, Mount Jefferson, the Three Sisters, Broken Top, Mount Bachelor. The whole spine of the range. I got out of the car and stood at the railing, and I let the wind move through me for a few minutes. The compass was in my jacket pocket. I could feel its weight against my chest. North was to my right, toward the mountains. I am 30 years old. I am an investigative journalist. I work in a newsroom in Portland that lets me do the kind of work I was born to do, finding the truth that other people are paid to hide. I have an apartment I love. I have colleagues who respect me. I have Devon, who has become a friend in the way that people become friends when they have walked through something difficult together. I have Aunt Leona, who I see now every other weekend and who has filled in 14 years of family stories I had been missing. I have my parents' graves in a cemetery on a hill in Bend, and I know how to find them now. I do not have a husband or children or a settled domestic life. I do not have my parents back. I do not have the years that were taken from me, the proms I didn't go to, the college I didn't attend at 18, the family holidays I missed, the slow, ordinary developmental milestones that other people get to take for granted. But I have the truth. I have the record. I have the work. And I have a silver compass that has been in my family for 4 generations and still points north. If you've ever been told you don't matter and proved them wrong, if you've ever come back from a disappearance someone else engineered for you, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't. And if you've ever held something a parent gave you that turned out to be the only thing that kept you going, tell me about it in the comments. I want to know what your compass was. I want to know how you found north. My name is Tamsin Halverson. I survived. I came back. And the man who declared me dead is the one whose name is being erased from the building plaques in the town where he tried to bury me.